Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take your sources, unpack them, and really pull out the most important bits of knowledge and insight for you. Today, we're diving into something super useful. It's about, well, truly understanding information, the subtle art of reading between the lines. Our main source material for this deep dive is pretty fascinating, actually. It's a guide. Originally for English tests, like the PTE, but here's where it gets really interesting for us. It's basically a masterclass in spotting those hidden opinions, cutting through clever misdirection in pretty much any text you read, so forget just test questions. Our mission today is to equip you with those core skills, how to identify an author's real point of view, even when it's like buried deep or subtly disguised. Get ready for some, hopefully, aha moments that might just change how you look at complex information.
Yeah, what's really illuminating here, I think, is how this material kind of peels back the layers on challenging reading comprehension. It really spotlights one of the toughest tasks for anyone trying to, deeply understand a text, figuring out the author's underlying opinion, especially when it's not spelled out.
Right. When they're not saying, I think.
Exactly. And that brings up a pretty big question for all of us, doesn't it? If even, say, formal academic writing can be a bit misleading with tricky synonyms or literary devices, well, how much more careful do we need to be with just the sheer volume of information we run into every single day?
That's a great point.
We're even going to dig into a really good example text later. It's about urban transportation, and it just powerfully reveals these common societal assumptions and some pretty deeply held biases from the author, too.
What first jumped out at me from this material was how it immediately flagged the difficulty, right?
Yeah.
Getting to that author's true perspective, it's a real challenge.
It is.
Because, like you said, the text often uses the third person. The author isn't putting themselves right there saying, I believe. And the language itself, it can be a bit of a trickster. The source warns us about synonymous language, where words might seem to match an answer choice, maybe. But the underlying meaning doesn't quite fit the author's actual stance. It's like a word trap.
Absolutely. A word trap. That's a good way to put it. And one of the main ways this misdirection happens is through things like literary devices. Personification is a classic one.
Ah, okay.
So take this statement we found. Berlin has an efficient public transport system. Seems straightforward. But the text itself actually says something like, yet even New York pales next to transport systems like those in Tokyo, Seoul, Paris, Berlin, and so on.
Right, pales. So New York is being described like a person feeling faint or looking weak.
Precisely. New York is given that human characteristic, it pales. The comparison being made isn't just a list. It's between a, well, less impressive New York system and the presumably robust and maybe healthy systems in cities like Berlin.
Yep.
So if you just scan and see Berlin has an efficient system, you might grab that. But you miss the real point being made. The key wasn't a direct statement about Berlin's efficiency on its own. It was that subtle comparison. It makes you infer Berlin's strength relative to New York.
Right.
It really teaches us something important. Sometimes the most profound truth isn't just stated plainly. It's shown through comparison or other devices.
That's fascinating. So it's like the author is handing you clues, maybe, rather than just direct answers.
Yeah.
And it really highlights that you've got to infer meaning from that comparison, not just hunt for the exact words matching up. But speaking of things that aren't directly stated, the material also had some really good advice about avoiding inferences that, seem logical but aren't actually in the text. I remember totally falling for one of these ones.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, if an answer option suggested, say, that New York's public transport was definitely going to be replaced by cars soon, I mean, you could maybe infer that from a general trend, but if the text never explicitly says it...
That's a dangerous trap.
It is, isn't it? Especially if the question isn't asking you to infer. You've got to stick to what the passage directly supports.
That's such a vital distinction.
Yeah.
And it's crucial for critical thinking way beyond any test, right?
Absolutely.
It teaches us to constantly ask ourselves, is this an explicit claim the author is making? Or am I being kind of led towards a conclusion that isn't fully backed up by the words right there on the page? It's about not being fooled, really, whether it's marketing, news articles, even just, casual chats.
Okay, so we've seen how authors can imply meaning subtly, and also how they might tempt you into making leaps the text doesn't support. But what about when they seem to say one thing, but actually mean the complete opposite? The source had some great stuff on that, too.
It did, yeah. And our deep dive into that author's perspective in the urban transport example is just a perfect illustration of this. The author clearly thinks the shift from public transport to cars has caused a ton of problems,
Right.
but they express it in such a clever, almost indirect way.
They do it so subtly. The source material points out how the author uses the pronoun we. Remember that. When discussing the shift away from public transport being embedded in the American national consciousness.
Hmm.
It's not the author saying, I think this is the national view, but it's a really smart way of speaking through that perceived national viewpoint.
Right.
Almost like they're holding it up for inspection.
Exactly. And here's the real twist, the kicker,
Yeah.
the very next sentence. We talk about investing in roads and freeways, but we talk about subsidizing public transport. Now that's presented as this national consciousness,
Right.
but it's the exact opposite of what the author actually believes or wants you to believe. They're using that we to highlight a kind of bitter truth, something they clearly disagree with.
Wow. So if you saw an answer option saying the author supports investing in roads, you'd be completely off track.
Totally misled. Because that's the very thing they're being sardonic or critical about. It's a brilliant misdirection, actually.
Yeah, sardonic is the perfect word.
It is. And the author's bitterness, or maybe cynicism, it comes through even more strongly when they say, governments criticize public transport networks for losing money. And they add, one wonders if roads generally make money.
Ah, yes, that line.
That last bit is just dripping with sarcasm, isn't it? It's a rhetorical question designed to point out what the author sees as hypocrisy, how public transport is treated versus roads.
Right, the double standard.
Precisely. So an answer suggesting taxpayers should subsidize roads would also be wrong, because the author's whole point, made bitterly, is that taxpayers already do that for roads, while public transport gets labeled a subsidy and criticized for losing money.
Okay, so the author's preference is clearly
For a return to, or at least better treatment of, public transport.
that really drives home such a powerful technique for spotting bias and opinion, doesn't it? Recognizing when an author is being sarcastic or cynical, or when they present a viewpoint just so they can immediately knock it down or lament it. But, it's not all traps and tricks, is it? The source also showed times where synonymous language did actually work, where it confirmed the meaning.
That's true, yeah. It wasn't all misdirection. The text also showed how sometimes careful word choice does line up. For instance, when the passage said, many accuse a consortium of car companies.
Huh?
And then an answer option might read, many people blame car companies for ending the tramcar system in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
In that case, accuse and blame are pretty close synonyms, right?
Mm.
And the core meaning aligns perfectly.
Right, that makes sense.
So it really highlights this kind of nuanced dance between direct meaning, implied perspective, and how crucial it is to tell the difference.
And the text also backed up other points the author was making, didn't it? Like smog causing health problems because of all the cars. That fits the author's bigger argument.
Yes, exactly. It reinforces that the health issues, the smog, it's all part of the author's larger plea, connecting back to cars dominating the streets and the problems that causes.
So let's pull this all together. What does this mean for us, for you listening?
Today, we've really unpacked this subtle art, haven't we? Identifying an author's true perspective, whether that's understanding an implied comparison, like with personification, or recognizing that sardonic tone, telling the difference between direct statements and those tempting inferences,
Yeah.
or even spotting how a pronoun like we can be used to reflect a national idea that the author actually disagrees with quite strongly. Our urban transport example really showed us how an author can express that deep bitterness or cynicism about big societal shifts, like moving from public transport to cars using all these kinds of techniques. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, I mean, mastering these skills, spotting when someone's being sardonic, or when a statement might mean the opposite of what it literally says, that's just invaluable, isn't it?
Totally.
It helps you recognize, for example, that when we talk about investing in roads but subsidizing public transport, there's a really powerful, often unquestioned story or narrative being told in society.
Right. The language itself shapes the perception.
Exactly. And this raises, I think, an important question for you to take away.
Okay.
As you go about your week, maybe listening to the news, reading articles, or just in conversations, how might you now apply what we've talked about today? How can you try to discern those underlying opinions, the biases, the subtle intentions of the authors and speakers around you, especially when it comes to things like, well, civic necessities or public policy decisions?
Something to definitely think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.